Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we'll understand an important concept into a .NET Core ecosystem, and that is termed as option pattern in .NET Core. So while working with a .NET Core, you must have come across to a scenario where you need to read a value, maybe your connection string, maybe your app configuration from your app settings.json file. And today we'll cover how we can do this with the help of option pattern, which is a type safe way and an easy way of implementing this bit. To start with, I have already created two keys into my apps settings.json file, and those keys names are product API key and a customer API key with some random value inside it. It does not consist of a real values as of now. These two keys are under the API key setting. Now, I'll first go to my employee controller, and in this, I will let you know a naive way of reading those files. You can see in my employee controller, I have already injected an IConfiguration interface, and with the help of this IConfiguration interface, I am reading these two values from here with the help of API keys colon product API key and API keys colon customer API keys. This method is fine, this is good, but there are certain drawbacks as well of using this method. The first drawback is that these methods, which over there is hard coded. If you have some changes into any of your keys, then this method will not even let you know that you have done some changes and you will not even notified. Assuming you are reading the keys using this approach into 10 different places in your code base, and later on, if you change the product API key name from product API key to let's say product API keys, and if you build your code by Control Shift Build, you will not get any kind of hint, any kind of error from this framework itself. And that is difficult to maintain because obviously these keys are hard coded. So, in this way, you can read the configuration, but that is not a very optimal way of reading it from your configuration with the help of IConfiguration interface. And in order to solve this problem into .NET Core ecosystem, we have a pattern called as option pattern. Now, option pattern is very much important and it's very simple as well. There are a couple of steps that you need to follow to understand an option pattern. And the very first step is you need to create a class inside it. And this class should consist of all the properties which is exactly same with the way that you have defined it inside your app settings.development.json file. In my scenario, I have a key name as product API key and customer API key. That's why I have created a class name as API key model DTO. And two properties that exist inside this should be exactly have the same naming convention, which is my product API key and a customer API key. Then in the next step, I have to go to program.cs, and in the program.cs, I need to register this inside my program.cs with this way. So I will let it down that builder.services.configure, pass the class model reference, and then give the section name itself. And this will do all the wonders, all the heavy lifting behind the scene. It will automatically read the value from my API key section and then bind those values inside my API key D model DTO at runtime. Let's understand this. Let's see this in action. So in order to demonstrate this video, I have already created a controller named as option controller into my ecosystem. And this option controller inject an IOption interface. This IOption interface consists of this class file. And once you have this class file injected into your constructor injection as a part of your DI, then you can simply read this value with the help of this object followed by the customer API key and the product API key. Now, the biggest advantage of this approach is you are not hard coding anything into your code base. It is simply reading from your class file, which is type safe. Tomorrow, if you change any keys into your app settings file, you will automatically get a null value in these file itself, and that will help you out to understand that you have to modify this location as well. Moreover, you need not to maintain, you need not to write this kind of code again and again, which might create some kind of typo if you use them so many times. So let's run this first and see this in action. So I am running this API project in my code base and I'll jump back to Postman to test this. The first endpoint is get employee endpoint, and if I click on send, it will automatically hit my controller. And you can see if I press F10, it is reading all those values and giving me an output as a product API key and a customer API key. Similarly, if I go to my IOption interface, which is the one that I had just created, and in this option control interface, I am injecting it with the help of my IOption attribute. And if I again press a breakpoint over here, and press on send button from my postman, you will notice that I am still able to read both the values from my app settings file, and that too in a very easy and reliable way. So there's no difference in the output in both the cases, and I can use them whatever I want. So this is all about an option pattern, which will give you out a way to read the value from the configuration into a simple and effective way without creating any kind of dependency, without compromising with any kind of type safety. Now, option pattern does not consist of only IOption interface. There are a couple of interfaces as well, which is exposed by this option pattern. And the one interface is IOptionMonitor. The second interface is IOptionSnapshot. And these two interfaces can be useful in a scenario depending upon the use case itself. So let's understand them one by one. So if we discuss about an I options, which is the one that we have just gone through it consists of a drawback as well. And the drawback is that this I option is registered as a singleton in my memory. So whenever I start my application and whatever the configuration value that exists at that particular time, this I option will read only those configuration value. Anything that you modified after running your application will be ignored by this I option interface itself. So let's see this in action. Right now, I'm still running my application. I'm still running my application itself. And if I go to my app settings file, and instead of this product key API 1, if I make this as product key API 2 over here, and if I press Control S, that is saving my solution. Please notice that I have not stopped my application. It's still in progress, it's still in running mode. And now if I navigate back to my postman, and if I click on send button, you will notice it will again hit my debugger, and this time it is not reading the latest value of it. So in a scenario, if you want to read a latest changes without restarting the application, then I option will not work in that situation. And in that case, you have to jump to either I option monitor or I option snapshot interfaces to read those configuration. So let's see how we can read these configuration with the help of my I option monitor and I option snapshot interface, and what's the difference between both of them. The first part is my I option monitor. So if I go to my I option monitor interface, it again is the same thing. Instead of injecting an I option inside my constructor, I need to use a separate interface which is called as I option monitor. Again, we have to pass the class object name, and the code will still remain the same. But in this way, what we can do is we can simply change the value from the configuration after running the application, and it should work. In this example, I have exposed a separate endpoint with the name as API controller option monitor, and it also reads the value from my app settings file and displayed on the UI. But it reads value twice. First, it will read the current value, and then I am modifying something. I'll take a delay over there, and then it will display the final values. So let's first see this in action. I'll go to back my postman, and if I click on I option monitor, and if I click on this send button, it will call my API endpoint, and this time I am reading the value from my app settings. And if I press F5, you will notice that both the starting value and updated value are still same, right? They are not modified, but they are modified, they are getting the latest value. Because remember, when we started this application, we were setting it up as product API 1 and customer API 1, and while running this application, I made it to product API 2 and customer API 2 itself. So option monitor is capable of reading the latest configuration without even running the application. Let's again check this by some more scenarios. Now I again click on send button, and this time it will hit my debugger. It will hit my it will hit to this code base, and it will read my first value. And then if I go to my app settings file, and let's say if I made changes into my app settings file by making it 3 and 3 over there, and let's do a control save, my option monitor will still trigger ins. It will still raise a notification to my app settings file. With the help of this notification, it will start reading the latest value. Now, we have to understand one more important concept in an I option monitor interface, that it will not read the value instantly. It will basically give a change notification. A notification will be there. And depending upon that notification, depending upon that change event, it will start reading those values. So up to this point, what I have done is I have already read the value from my app settings file. And first I have read the older value. And then I am applying a delay so that all those change effects should come into a picture. And then I am trying, if we proceed further, you will notice that the values that were there in the starting of application is differ than the values that I am getting after updating the value. You can see I started the application with product API key 2, and while even calling this API, I hit my controller and I called product API key 3, and in this way you will notice that the latest values are coming into my browser itself. So with the help of this IOptionMonitor interface, I can even read the value. I can even change the, even I can even get the updated value even in the same request itself. And that is the use case of your IOptionMonitor. It is the most powerful option available into an option pattern because it detects configuration changes in a real time. It works in a singleton class, and it also allow notification and on change method. This option monitor is very much ideal for any kind of feature flags, maybe a dynamic settings, maybe a long running services. Okay. So that is something which is useful, which is there in an IOption monitor. Now let's understand the other part of it that is called as an IOptionSnapshot. Now, IOptionSnapshot is another interface which is registered into my ecosystem. And if I go to another controller inside it with the name as Option Snapshot Controller, you will notice that I have almost written the same piece of code base, but the only difference is there I have injected an IOptionSnapshot interface inside it. And the major difference between an IOptionSnapshot and IOptionMonitor is a IOptionSnapshot is scoped to a request, which means that it reloads value for every request but only works in a scoped services like a controller. In a simple terms, for example, if you hit a controller and while hitting a controller, if you change the app settings file or if you change the configuration value inside your app settings file, then this I option snapshot will not read the latest values into that particular request. It will read the latest value in the next request itself, but that particular request will still have the older values. So, for example, in this scenario, if I jump back to my postman and if I click on I option snapshot, and let's first see the current output of it, we will notice that currently I am getting product API 3 and product customer API 3 in both the cases. But if I again click on the send button, and while I read the starting values, and then if I go to my app settings file, and if I modify this value as 4 over here, and if I save it, and if I proceed further, you will still notice that both the output is still 3. But if I again send it, and if I again press F5, then it should be 4 in this case. Okay. So in simple terms, the major difference between an I option monitor and an I option snapshot is that I option snapshot reloads value for an every request, but it only worked in a scope services. It is perfect for web application where web config may change between requests, but I option monitor is a very powerful option and it can even detect the changes in the real time. If you modify this in the middle of the request itself, it will pick the latest changes and it will work accordingly. Now, IOptionMonitor also comes with certain drawbacks, and they are not drawback, I should say, but they are the precautions which you should be using. This IOptionMonitor is a very dynamic behavior, and not be exploiting it. Should not be using in those scenarios, in those situations where a complete business logic depends upon these configuration. Because think of this, that half business logic executes under the previous configuration, and if you modify in between, then half business logic will work with the next configuration. So that's why that might cause some kind of data issue in your code base, which will be very difficult to debug in later stage. Now, if we talk about option pattern in .NET ecosystem, in simple terms, it is a way to read a configuration from your app settings file. There are three interfaces which is exposed by option pattern. The basic one is IOption, which does not change its value even in the same request. Even if I click on this send button right now, you will notice that it will still getting the older value. Even if I have modified my customer API key and product API key to 4 this time, but I have not restarted my application. And hence, this IOption interface is still getting the older value, the value which I had done, I had changes while starting my application. On the other hand side, if I use IOptionMonitor, it can read the value even in the configuration if it changed in the middle of the request. And IOptionSnapshot will only read those values that got changed whenever you make a single request, and it get the updated value in the next record itself. So this is all about an option pattern, guys, in .NET Core ecosystem, a very important concept from an interview perspective. And you should be knowing this while working with a .NET Core, whether it's an API or it's a MVC project. So this is it from my side for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, if you have any comments on this content, please let me know in the comment section and I'll surely reply over there. If you're liking my content, then please like, share, subscribe. That is really helpful for me. It will keep me motivated to generate new content, to record new videos for you. Thank you.